Well, hello and welcome back to another video. This is your first time visiting. My name is Jimmy Reyes and I'm a professional comic book inker. Welcome to my channel where I share tips, techniques, and an inside look at my inking process. For today's video, we're going to travel back to the 1970s when bell-bottoms and feathered hair were in style. For the Charlie's Angels alternate cover, penciled by superstar artist David Finch, inked by yours truly, and I got to work with an amazing editor, Matt Idelson, on this amazing cover. And if you're interested in owning a bit of comic book history, the original artwork is for sale. For the very first time, Charlie's Angels has ever had their very own full-length American comic book. And the Charlie's Angels comic book is available for order in the April edition of the Previews catalog. So be sure to ask your local comic store to reserve your copy. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at my inking process. On your screen, you're going to see the tools that I use. The Hunt 102 Quill. I also used a RAPHAEL 8404 brush, a Winsor Newton Series 7 miniature brush. The ink that I used is KOH-I-NOR ink, the same ink used in repeatograph tech pens. I did use the scratch art tool to make a correction. You can also use the scratch art tool to add textures. This cover is for Charlie's Angels #1, published by Dynamite Entertainment, and the cover is penciled by comic book artist David Finch. And this is only my second time inking David Finch at this point here on this cover. Although David and I just started working together, we already seem to have a natural rhythm going. And one of the benefits to that as well is not only do we have a rhythm going as far as the working relationship between penciler and inker, we also have become friends. We've also made a friendship in that our personalities seem to have meshed very well together. And that makes it much easier to work together. Although you don't have to like somebody in order to work with them, but it does make things much more pleasant. And when you enjoy what you're doing and you're having fun, then you're much more productive. And even though this is only the second time that I've inked over David Finch, I've already gained his confidence. And Dave allows me to work, and he trusts what I'm going to do with his pencils. I seem to be able to interpret his pencils very easily. It's a style that I'm very comfortable with. It's a style that I've also studied and have admired for quite some time, so it was easy for me to transition over David's work. It's a language that I speak. So David and I don't really talk about the artwork while I'm doing the artwork. He allows me to work, and then we sometimes will talk about the artwork afterwards. Usually, Dave is so nice, usually it's a positive conversation. He's complimenting a lot of the things. There seems to be much more positive than negatives. You know, and you can't take criticism negatively. You have to be able to take the criticism and be able to learn from it. You want to make sure what you're doing, that your penciler is happy with what you're doing. Because it is their work that you're finishing, that you're adding a finishing touch to. And I enjoy being a part of a team and working symbiotically together with David on this one piece of artwork. Although I do want to give a fresh look to David's work without changing David's artwork, but I don't want to try to mimic other inkers, and I don't want to try to copy another inker. What I want to do is I simply want to find my own voice and ink in my own way, my own style. Although I do use a lot of techniques that have been proven and that have been used by previous inkers for the past 30 years. And my style of inking is heavily influenced from Scott Williams. I've also been told that I ink a lot like Matt Banning as well. It seems to be the most common feedback that I get is people will often compare me to Matt Banning. So to be compared to such a talented inker is a tremendous compliment. One of the things that I enjoy doing when I'm working is that I enjoy inking textures. And David's artwork is a perfect platform for that. Dave is really great at penciling in his textures, but I like to take them just a step further in the inks. Mostly because when David's working, it's almost as if he's placing a note down for me to say, hey, this is what I've started doing here, I just need you to finish that. You know, this is where I want this texture to go. And this way, because the pencilers are on a schedule, you know, everyone's on a deadline, we're all trying to finish the cover or project by a certain date. So It can save the penciler time if he's already familiar with his inker and knows what the inker is going to do, and he can place down these little notes and has confidence in his inker. And when you receive it as inker, then you can tighten up the textures, you can tighten up the rendering, or you can change the textures up just a little bit and add to it. Because you want your line work to complement the pencils. You don't want to overpower the pencils. You do want to take them to the next level without changing up what the artist has done or making the artwork look unrecognizable. My work over David Finch is just going to improve over time. It's going to get better. So we're off to such a great start working together, and things just seem to be flowing so smoothly, naturally, that I'm excited about the future. Can't wait to see what we will be doing together just a month from now, or even a year from now, or a few years from now. Can't wait to see how the work is going to look at that point. It's going to reach new levels. And now that I'm working with David Finch, I have so much more respect for his work and for his ability. Because I remember when he was offered this cover, and they needed the cover done right away. And David just seemed to pull this cover out of the air, just naturally, just made it appear like a magician. And what seemed to be done with very little effort, it seemed like it was all just natural. And I know that it's years of practice and years of techniques and years of trial and error, and it's experience. You know, he was able to just pencil this cover in such a beautiful layout, nice dynamic and great looking characters, and he was able to pencil it so quickly. And I was asked to ink it very quickly. To be perfectly honest, I didn't know if I could ink that fast, because I have never had to ink that fast. So I was up for the challenge. And they asked, hey, you know, Jimmy, can you get this done today? And I thought in my head, well, I'm gonna find out. Let's see if I can. So this is actually all done very quickly, and I made the deadline. Very proud of myself, without cutting any quality. And in fact, I feel that even though I worked at a faster pace, I was still able to maintain that quality. And not only do I feel that I maintain the quality, but I also discovered that I can ink fairly quickly and work for many hours straight through without stopping. Not only do you want your work to look attractive and have high quality line work, you also want to be reliable, dependable, and easy to work with. Because when it comes time to choosing an inker to work with, you know, you're going to want to work with somebody who is easy to work with and somebody who understands your line work. And I believe that's why Dave continues to work with me. Once you receive your first project, it doesn't guarantee that there's going to be work in the future, or it doesn't mean that you're going to continue to work for the rest of your life. You do have to take each project very seriously and treat each project as if it's your last. You want to make sure that you're doing the best work possible, and you want to make sure you meet your deadlines. And you're going to have to continue to network. Not only is there the creative side when you're freelancing, there's also the business side, the salesman side. You know, you still have to go out there and sell your talent. You still have to go out and hunt down that work until you establish yourself. Once you've established yourself with the company and you've built up a brand or a name, then it's much easier at that point. Then the work does come to you, or the projects then at that point that are offered to you. But you always have to be reliable and dependable. The comic book industry is very competitive. There are a lot of very talented people out there who are all wanting to work within this small industry. And now that we have the World Wide Web, and a lot of files are sent electronically, that opens up the market to the entire planet, the entire world, as long as they have internet. So you're now competing with the world. You're no longer competing with just the US. So you want to make sure you meet your deadlines. And how do you meet deadlines? When you work at home, there's a lot of different distractions that are out there. Your friends, family. So you have to discipline yourself and manage your time properly. Because inking is very labor intense. And the upside for me is that I'm doing something that I love, something that I enjoy doing. And to be honest, it doesn't feel like work. Although I cannot forget that it is work, and I have to treat it as work. And I enjoy inking very much. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about my technique and my approach to inking over David Finch. The reason that I choose the nib, the 102, is that I want to maintain the energy from the pencils by giving the ink work a little bit of a sketch look. I don't want it to be completely clean. I don't want lines to be completely smooth or look like they're computer generated, because that isn't David Finch's art style. I want to be able to try to retain that energy from his pencils and keep that sketch look, but I want to make that sketch look controlled. And a nib isn't the only way to ink a comic book page. I choose a nib because it's something that I'm also very comfortable with, and it gives me the line work that I'm looking for. And if you're just learning to ink, then I'd recommend learn both tools, because there are going to be times that when you need to use a brush. It could be based on the art style that you're inking, or it could be the quality of paper. Brush seems to be able to lay a line down, and it's much easier on the fibers that are on the surface of that Bristol board, where a nib can scratch those fibers, and if your Bristol board can't handle that, then your lines will bleed. So there are times using a brush is to your advantage. When inking with a nib, I have a light hand. I tend to not put too much pressure on the nib. By applying pressure, you can vary your line weight, you can achieve a thicker line, but I like to sculpt my lines as much as possible. There are times that I do want that wave in my line. I do want that variation from thick to thin or thin to thick to transition very quickly, and it kind of gives a bit of a wave in your line, and that's when I apply pressure. But most of the time I'm sculpting my lines, and because the angular line seems to work very well, and it complements Dave's art style very well. And by having a light hand, it's also much easier on the paper, because the nib is a steel tip, and it's very pointy, and it can actually cut into the surface of the Bristol board if you apply too much pressure on it. So some of the things you want to keep in mind, no matter who you're inking, is the light source that the penciler used when penciling and creating that page. You also want to keep shapes in mind. You want to be able to add textures, and you do want to have those textures to enhance the page and make sure that you're using textures properly at the right time. And when you're working over a penciler who has a good amount of rendering in their penciling, then you don't want to under render, you don't want to take away lines, at least not too many lines. You want to make sure you're keeping the amount of detail that the penciler has placed. But at the same time, you don't want to over render, you don't want to go in and go too crazy with the textures or the amount of hatching or cross hatching that your penciler may have. So you want to find that good balance between the two. You may have noticed that there's a blank sheet of copy paper underneath my right palm. The reason that I'm using the blank sheet of paper underneath my palm is so that to keep any of the oil from my skin or any perspiration from my hand, and preventing any type of smearing underneath. Unfortunately, that Dave actually pencils with a hard grade of lead. I'm assuming it's a 2H or a 3H. I actually haven't asked David yet what grade of lead he actually uses. But the reason I can tell that it's a hard lead is that it doesn't smear as easy. And that's a good thing, is that the softer the lead, the easier it is to smear. And when I'm inking over it, I would have to place a blank sheet of paper underneath. And with a harder lead, it's much more difficult to smear, so you can actually ink over it without using a blank sheet of paper underneath. As long as your hand isn't perspiring, or as long as there isn't a lot of oil on your skin, then you're really not at risk to smear the pencils. But just as for my protection, just to make sure that I'm not going to smear it, because then later, when you're done inking, if you smear the graphite underneath the ink, then you've got more to erase. So then it makes more work for you when later down the road when you do have to clean up the pencil work underneath.
And earlier I mentioned that sometimes your pencil will place notations down for you, not necessarily as a written notation, but when they place their textures and they're not exactly fully rendered, or it's a little bit of a loose texture or a little bit of loose rendering. And that's kind of like a notation when, for you as the inker, and when you built that or established that working relationship, to let you know that, hey, this is where I would like a texture. So I decided to tighten up the texture and to kind of create this pattern. And because texture is really often its pattern. And I created this pattern by using 4 intersecting lines. I have the lines that are vertical, the lines that are horizontal, and 2 lines that are diagonal, going from right to left, and the second one going from left to right. So it creates this pattern, and depending on how you space your lines and how you break your lines is going to change up the effect of that pattern. By placing your lines closer together, making your lines thicker, it appears to create a darker gradient, a darker tone. The further your lines are spaced and the thinner your lines are, then the lighter the gray tone will be. And so by intersecting those lines, by placing the lines going horizontally and diagonally, it tightens up that pattern. It creates a really nice pattern effect. And I knew in advance that I was going to create a texture on top of that pattern. So I built the pattern underneath with the intention to add a texture above using the artist sponge. What I do with the artist sponge is I use white ink, or you can even use the opaque white. Dr. Martin has a bleed proof, and there's also a pro white. And what I decided to use is I used the white India ink, and that's actually my favorite ink. It's from Dr. Martin, and it's actually the pen white that's used in technical pens and airbrushes. And you can actually find a list of my supplies in my video, Art Supplies for Inkers. So I used the artist sponge and white ink and a artist sponge to dab on the white ink to break up the pattern underneath that I've created, that you're watching now on your screen. And the reason I decided that I wanted to break up that pattern is that I wanted it to look almost like a faded texture. And so it's a really neat effect. It's an extra step, and these extra steps that you do and can separate you from other inkers. It can help create texture and mood and a feel to the artwork. You also want to keep in mind that the artwork is going to be reduced by 67%. And if you're working on a standard comic book art page, the artwork is reduced. So any lines that you place together, and if lines are very close together, then they're going to be even closer together when the artwork is reduced. So you have to keep in mind that the closer the lines get together, the darker the tone will be. And so if it's not intentional, then your lines can look a bit muddy, they can get a bit darker because the gap between them does close in when they're reduced. Now when I'm creating these lines, I'm creating the vertical and the horizontal lines and the diagonal lines that are coming from the top left corner down to the bottom right corner and reverse on the opposite side. I like to use a straight edge because I would like to make sure that my lines are neat and a bit clean in there, even though this pattern is supposed to have a bit more of a textured look, a bit more of a sketch look to it. I do use the straight edge. You can freehand them if you want to. The main reason, I guess, the reason that I use the straight edge is really to help spacing between the lines for me, so that my lines don't wave, and it helps me measure the distance between the lines. If you watched my previous videos or videos that I've made in the past, you'll notice that I use the tape to mask off areas quite often. The type of tape that I'm using is an artist tape. It's a low adhesive masking tape, and it makes it safe for the artwork. It's so that when I place it down on my artwork, and when I peel it back up, it's not going to damage the surface of the board. Although sometimes it will pull up some of the graphite underneath, and it makes it look almost like silly putty from the 1970s, and it kind of makes it a little bit of a print underneath, but it doesn't damage the surface of the artboard or damage the artwork at all. This is a closer look of the pattern. Some of my textures, you can see down the bottom, it creates a darker tone around the boxes and fades out into a lighter gray tone. And near the top, I start breaking the lines and spacing them out a little further to kind of create that sort of an ombre or grading effect that blends into the white background. But as I mentioned later, I go back in and create that stamped effect to create the faded look on the texture. Now I like to use the same brush that I use for my line work, which is a RAPHAEL 8404, and it's size 2. And what I do is I generally keep an older brush that doesn't give me the type of line quality that it used to. It no longer snaps back into shape to a really fine point. So I keep my brushes and I just repurpose them, and I use them for spotting blacks, which is basically just filling in the black area. I do use an older brush where the bristle has frayed the hair on the very end of the brush, where it's begun to fray, and that gives me a dry brush effect or different type of textures and things with it. So I generally keep my brushes. Previously I was using the Winsor Newton Series 7 brush, the same size 2, and it's an excellent brush. It's great. I recently switched over to the RAPHAEL 8404, and I have to say that I enjoy the RAPHAEL 8404 much more. It just seems to release the ink so much more smoothly, and it seems to hold ink much longer than the Winsor Newton Series 7. But really, to be honest, both brushes are excellent brushes. They're both Kolinsky Sable. They're both watercolor brushes, and they're both of high quality. And it's really a preference. I'd recommend trying both brands and find the one that works best for you and your needs. So as I mentioned, I prefer the RAPHAEL 8404, and that's the brush that I'm using in this video. I'm using that to spot my blacks and fill in the blacks. You can actually use the same brush that you do your line work with. I like to keep the brush points. I like to take care of my brush and not use it as roughly. I do sort of baby my brushes because they are a bit pricey, and I like the once you get used to a brush and it's giving you a fine point, you really want to stick with that one particular brush, because when you're switching brushes, and if you have to order them online, because in my case my local art stores don't carry this brand of RAPHAEL 8404, so I have to order them specialty, have them mailed in or ordered online. And when they're shipped, depending on how they're packaged, sometimes they come in damaged, sometimes the brush just doesn't have a fine point to it. And you tend to get that with a nib. Sometimes you have nibs in there that are duds, where they just don't work properly. And that happens with brushes as well. So when I find a good brush and I like it, I take care of it, I stick with it, and that's the reason why I use an older brush to spot my blacks. Some of the bleeds that I've done on this particular piece was done with brush. And I believe the brush that I'm using right now in the video is actually the Winsor Newton Series 7 miniature brush. Miniature meaning that the hair on the end of the brush are much shorter, so it gives you less of a snap, less of a bend, and it feels a bit more like using a nib. It's a bit more stiffer, and it gives me a line, a much straighter line with less variation to it. I mean, it's still sable hair, so pressure you place down, I mean, you're still going to vary your line weight. It is flexible, much more flexible than the nib, but not as flexible as the regular size round brush that I used previously in the video. So I like to use the miniature brush when I'm doing smaller little tick lines or smaller little bleeds. And at this point here, I was still doing a little bit of experiment, still trying some brush in there for Dave's work, and not completely using nib throughout there. I was still mixing some brush in there. Later on, Dave and I do this one particular piece for a bat character. I'm sure you guys can guess who he is, but unfortunately, I mean, I can't tell you what the piece is yet, but in the future, though, we'll be able to release the video on that one, and it's an amazing piece. I mean, David Finch is just amazing eye for composition and just placing these characters down all on the book. I mean, on this particular piece that we did, and I'm just so excited to be a part of that artwork. And in that particular one, I thought to myself, well, for this one that has so many characters, and the characters are pretty small, and there's a lot of little detail in it, I'm going to go all nib on that. So there's times when I ink all nib, and there's times when I integrate brush in there, and there's some times when I ink completely with brush. Some of it depends on the mood, some of it depends on what the penciler has placed on the page, and a little bit here and there. It is still experimenting to see what looks good on a particular penciler when I'm starting to ink their art style. And you know, it's little things here and there that I integrate in the artwork to test it safely, and not in obvious areas where just in case I don't like the line work, that it stands out like a sore thumb, or I don't want it to be obvious. But yeah, I do a little bit of experimenting here and there. I want to make sure that I'm placing the type of line work that is going to complement the penciler's art style the most. You know, I really want to adapt to their style rather than convert them to my style. Sometimes you can find an inker, I'm sorry, not a penciler. Sometimes you'll find an inker whose work or art style overpowers the penciler, where you can tell right away, you know, hey, that's X inker right there, or that's Y inker right there, because they have one particular style, and they tend to stick with that, and so their work stands out. I like to try to keep the penciler style in the foreground as much as possible. I do want to have fun with the page, and I do want to add a few of my own style, my own touch in there, but at the same time, as I mentioned, I mean, I don't want to overpower the penciler's art style. I really want to complement it and enhance that work. And as I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the video, Dave and I seem to have a natural rhythm going where we, and where we seem to work very well together, both even personality and creatively. And Dave seemed to notice it faster than I did that my inking style works really well with his pencils. He has much more experience, and so he noticed it right away. And thankfully, the response that I've gotten off of YouTube has been very positive. Everyone has complimented and said, that they really enjoy my ink over David Finch's pencils, and I'm just really blown away by that. And I really appreciate that for everyone who's taken time to comment and send messages and things like that. It's very nice of you guys to do so. I enjoy Dave's work, but at the same time, I'm really happy to hear that the fans and a few of my peers all enjoy my work over David Finch's work as well. And I was starting to say where at the beginning of the video, I did mention that my work is going to improve over David Finch. My work is going to get better. going to find a rhythm and a style. Although we're at a good start. We're off to a good pace, and we're working very well together. And I appreciate all the compliments, and can only imagine what our work is going to look like together as a team in the near future, or even years down the road. I can only imagine how much more the quality is going to be, and how much better the artwork is going to be.
So we're approaching a part here in the video that my favorite part here in the video. It's actually nearing the part where I actually spilled some ink when I was opening my ink bottle. It has a sprout on the very tip of the, I believe it's a 4 fluid ounce of the KOH-I-NOR ink. And when I flipped it open to pour it into my little ink jar that I've got, it actually sprayed some ink, and it got on my desk, and a little piece actually landed right on the shoulder of the character of the angel that's down here that I'm actually inking right now. At this point in the video, it hasn't happened yet, but when it happened there, and the little piece got on there, you know, it was okay. You know, I didn't stress, because I do know of a technique and a way to have that removed and to get that without even using whiteout. You know, I've learned how to white out without whiteout. And here's that little dot right in the middle of the screen. It landed right on her shoulder. So I'm taking a scratch art tool, and with the scratch art tool, I am actually turning the scratch art tool at an angle, and angling it right almost flat with the paper. It's laying very flat. I'm trying to scrape it with without using the tip or the point of the scratch art blade. I'm actually trying to use the side of the scratch art blade. So I scrape it off there, and I get rid of the excess there with off the blade with my finger. And I'm using a plastic eraser here. It's an elastomer eraser, and I'm using that to buff out the surface of the Bristol board, smooth it out. In this case, you don't actually need to ink over it, so it didn't have to be really buffed or really smooth. I just wanted to make sure it was clean and that it wouldn't scan in or show up in the scan of the artwork. So I made a video specifically for that, on a tutorial showing that technique, and you will find that in my video library on this channel. With this cover having such a tight deadline, you know, you have to really manage your time and to stay focused. And it's actually pretty easy when you enjoy what you're doing, and especially working over an artist whose work you really admire, and it kept my interest. And even if it was artwork that from an artist who I didn't know or wasn't familiar with, I could still focus and work on it, because I really enjoy what I'm doing, and I love line work. And as I mentioned earlier, that you really want to take away as much distraction as possible. You know, as far as, you know, getting invited out to go to movies, or friends asking you to, you know, get out and go do things and stuff like that. You really need to be able to sit in one area, you know, and be able to work consistently through there. You know, I do recommend, I mean, getting up and taking a 15-minute walk, or you know, standing up, stretching your legs. You don't want to sit idle for too long. You want to make sure you take care of yourself. You know, health is very important. You want to make sure to stay, you know, heart healthy. You know, you want to have some cardio and get up and just walk around a little bit. Take the dog for a quick walk, or walk outside, go check the mail. And you want to make sure to take care of your hands. Your hands are the primary tool. I mean, it's almost like a surgeon. You know, you're Dr. Strange. You got to take care of your hands, and you want to be able to ink in later in life, especially if you're a young artist now. You want to be able to continue inking, you know, working or drawing until later in life, and once you're mature. Because it's very enjoyable. I enjoy it. And this particular piece, I was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed working on it so much that it really didn't feel like work. It didn't feel stressful, although the deadline was very tight. I actually skipped lunch and worked straight through, and I did have a few breaks, and got up and you know, did some of the things that I mentioned. You know, I got up and walked outside and took the dog out front for a little bit, and you know, went for a quick walk around the block, or you know, just got up and
and stretch my feet every now and then. But I pretty much stayed focused and worked through this piece all the way through, from morning all the way till late at night. I did stop, have some dinner, but I finally finished the piece at about 4 in the morning. So I worked a lot of hours on this piece, and I worked very hard to make sure that I did meet that deadline. And that type of effort like that, it is noticed. Editors do see that, even though they may not acknowledge it and things, but you know that they've noticed it when they offer you more work, and when people want to work with you, or when pencilers know they can depend on you and that their work is it's going to get done, it's going to get finished, and it's less stress for them, or less stress for the rest of your team. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to view this video. If you enjoyed watching the video, please click like, and if you haven't already become a subscriber, click subscribe so that you can get the latest updates on my new videos. Dave and I are working on more projects in the near future, and we'll have some new videos up for viewing very soon.